Okay, today we're going to talk about a new world order. And you'll see why I'm talking about that in just a moment. If you will give me just a second, hopefully my iPad will stay logged into what I want it to be logged into today. So, again, one of those weeks where a little bit lighter news this week in terms of volume, not funny light news, but it's it's just a sign that there's a lot of these things that are converging right now. Here's foreign policy, as we always talk about, a world disrupted, can we fix this? And whenever the world doesn't seem kind of chaotic and in a lot of turmoil, I'll stop using these covers. But I've been able to use them now for about 4 years, and I think that's indicative of the period of time that we're hurtling towards the 70th week of Daniel. I thought I would share, not because it's necessarily profound or anything, a Facebook post that I put up this week. There was a report this week that some Democrats in Congress, you might be surprised that the Democrats want to do this, is they want to introduce legislation that would require our State Department and ambassadors and that type of thing to recognize abortion as a human right. And they want to say, and so I sort of put up a Facebook post that they want to say abortion is a human right, and my response was, this is wrong, abortion is an inhuman right. R-I-T-E, meaning what it talks about in Scripture. In Jeremiah chapter 32, in fact, Jeremiah is I wouldn't say it's a wonderful book, it's a very important book, and I think, especially since prophecy is pattern, that we need to look at what was going on in Judah before the Babylonian invasion. First one started in about 606 BC. The last one was around 587, 586 BC. The temple was destroyed. And they were carried away to captivity in Babylon for 70 years. And this is what Jeremiah wrote and prophesied. In fact, we know that when Daniel was, in the first part of Daniel chapter 9, Daniel was reading the scroll of Jeremiah while he was in Babylon, in a pretty important position in the government, and he noticed that the prophecy said 70 years. And so he did the math, and he said, it's time for us to go back home. But his message was not one of, hey, let's get out of here. His message was one of repentance on the part of the nation of Israel for the sins that they had committed that had led to the 70-year captivity, one of which was this sin that was referenced, that you can read about it in 2 Kings, I think chapter 11. Solomon had actually erected a high place to the god Moloch. By the time of Jeremiah wrote this as one of his prophecies, is to indicate what the people of Judah, the kingdom of Judah, were doing wrong. But they set their abominations in the house, which is called by my name, to defile it. And they built the high places of Baal, which are in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to cause their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire unto Moloch, which I commanded them not. Neither came it into my mind that they should do this abomination to cause Judah to sin. And so we live in a culture where abortion is a human right. And the question is, how long does God tolerate that before he intervenes? As someone said with regard to other things in our culture, that as regards other things in our culture, God needs to intervene sooner. He needs to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. And with regard to this issue of abortion, I think it's a very grievous sin in the eyes of the Lord. 60 million, 65 million, whatever the number is now, children have been aborted in the last 45 years. How long does God show patience with that before he intervenes? And if he doesn't intervene soon, he needs to apologize to the people of Judah, because this is part of the reason that they were judged and the Babylonians came in and took them over. I use this verse a lot. This know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. Now as Jannes and Jambres withstood Moses. And by the way, that's not, Jannes and Jambres are not really mentioned in the Old Testament. There are Jewish traditions that Jannes and Jambres were magicians in the court of Pharaoh that opposed Moses. There is also in some Jewish tradition that they actually left Egypt with the children of Israel and were part of the group that caused the golden calf to be set up. So they were wicked and they corrupt. And I'm not trying to make fun of the person who did this. Someone had posted, and I think it was on the post about abortion being an inhuman right, that they posted this. I think it was clear they didn't do this on purpose. It was that you know how Facebook and your phone have that autocorrect feature, and you notice how that it kind of stumbles over Bible terms. So somebody had wrote this, that yes, we are living in this day, the last days, paralysis time shall come. And I just found that was kind of humorous because it actually speaks a lot of truth, because it does seem like sometimes the people in the church are almost moved to the state of paralysis. Is like, what do we do in opposition to all of this? In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and I hope my thing works here, it gives us some indication of this coming man of sin, the son of perdition, who we call the Antichrist, the pseudo-Christ, the one who comes in place of Christ. And it says in verse 4, 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 4, verse 3, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. In Daniel chapter 8, it also talks about this coming man. And it says in verse 23, chapter 8, verse 23, and in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper in practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. And then in Daniel chapter 11, it also, I think, what Paul was doing was, when he was talking about the man of sin, putting himself above all that is called God so that he is worshipped, was paraphrasing Daniel chapter 11, specifically verse 36 and following. And the king, of Daniel 11:36, and the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all. Now, the point of all of that is, as we look at things going on, it is not to bring you to a point of despair about what's happening. There is always hope, and the hope is that God is faithful, that we are not to fear God. We're not to fear the circumstances that we're in. We're to fear God because he can destroy both body and soul. The worst the devil can do is kill you. And in the end, if he kills you, you win. So there's always hope. There's always bright light, but it is a troubling world, I will admit. But I don't despair. I mean, I get up and go to work every day. But we do live in perilous times, or as my friend said in one of her Facebook posts, paralysis times. So let's look at some of the things that are going on. This is something I've not even talked about much. The stock market, even one of the leading newspapers this morning, they said, what should you do with your money? The mattress is looking like a pretty good place right now. And things are in a bit of turmoil in the world markets. How it plays out, I don't know. What's the timing of it? If I was that smart to understand market timing and everything, I would be doing these from my villa on my privately owned golf course someplace. Obviously, that's not happening, and that's likely not to happen. There is a new brochure. This is from Germany, and I spent a lot of time there. There's a wonderful tool, by the way, translate.google.com, which you can copy a lot of text, you can paste it in, and it will translate it for you. Now, it's not perfect, but it will give you certainly an understanding of what is being conveyed. So this is a brochure that's now being distributed to preschools in Germany. I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but the purpose stated behind this is to, quote, to open up development opportunities for children. This has caused a lot of people to be concerned about some of the things that they've written in there. If you look in the lower right-hand corner, it talks about, I think you don't even need Google Translate to understand what rectus extremis means, right-wing extremists. And so what it's talking about is there is a concern in the education system in Germany that young children are being taught things like marriage is between a man and a woman, that gender is a man or a woman, and they think this is terrible. In fact, it's interesting the way they phrase it. They use the term teaching your kids that there's two genders, teaching your kids that traditional marriage is the right way, makes you a right-wing extremist in the eyes of the German education establishment, and they refer to that kind of teaching as racism. Now, why do they do that? Well, because, on the left, everything is racist. So you can criticize, if you criticize Islam, you're a racist, but you're criticizing a religion and a way of life and a way of thought, not a particular person. Because I understand that there are Caucasian Muslims, there are Arab Muslims, there are Indonesian Muslims, there are Indian Muslims. In fact, the largest population of Muslim by country is Indonesia first, India is second. There are hundreds of millions of Muslims in those two countries. There are millions of Muslims in China. The Uyghurs is the ethnic group. But so this is the way that it's going. The other thing that happened this week was I mentioned a couple weeks ago about the Global Pact on Migration. And here's just a little video summary of what happened in Marrakesh, Morocco this week.
A wonderful occasion. It will make an enormous positive impact in the lives of millions of people.
Assalamu alaikum.
We live in a world that's home to 1.8 billion young people. And although we come from all around the world and have different life stories, the one thing that we have in common is our hope to lead happy and prosperous lives.
More than 60,000 migrants have died on the move since the year 2000. And this is a source of collective shame. And of course, behind every number is a person, a woman, a child, a man, who simply dream for what any one of us dream: opportunity, dignity, and a better life.
And so this meeting in Marrakesh, Morocco, and you notice they never have these meetings in New Jersey or North Dakota in the middle of winter. But here is this, so this global compact on migration, and this rises out of, this is from the UN press release. The adoption of the pact, now known as the Marrakesh Compact, coincides with the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. You notice all these 70th anniversaries that are coming up? That might be significant. A document which is central to the pact. Mr. Guterres said it would be ironic if on the day we commemorate the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we would consider that migrants are to be excluded from the scope of the declaration. And here is the Declaration on Human Rights and the adopting resolution from the UN from 1948, 70 years ago, this week. And to celebrate it, they adopted another one about the Global Compact on Migration, which I noticed for you last week that it essentially will restrict, and I think in countries that sign on to it, it will restrict your ability to criticize migration. It will turn it into a form of hate speech. Now, in places that don't really charge you with a crime for hate speech, you should be okay. But a lot of countries are signing on to this. I believe the UK signed on to it, I'm not sure. I think Australia did not. Canada did. Canada seems to be going further to the left under baby boy Trudeau, their prime minister. The US will not sign on to it. There were 20 or 30 countries, I believe, that did not sign on to this pact. Of course, you saw Angela Merkel there, so you know that Germany signed on to it. And so Germany signed on to it, and they're part of this global push. And Guterres can sit there and complain about all the migrants that have died over the past number of years, but the fact of the matter is that it is things like the Global Compact on Migration that encourages people to take great risks to immigrate when there are procedures set up that they could follow and do it without risk. And there was, tragically, there was a 7-year-old girl who died in a detention center down in New Mexico or Arizona this week. And of course, that's President Trump's fault. Even though everybody looked at her and everybody thought she was okay. So there are a lot of ripples in the current global order. That's why I titled this A New World Order. For example, one of them is Brexit. Theresa May survived a vote of no confidence this week. But nobody seems to be happy. The people on the left are not happy with having been forced to go into the Brexit process. The people on the right in the United Kingdom are upset because she hasn't done a very good job negotiating it. And the reaction of people in Europe, like Germany and France and other countries, has been, look, we gave you our best offer and that's it. And it's difficult there's a good interview with David Goldman. He used to write, I think he may still write under the name Spengler at Asia Times. He was interviewed by Frank Gaffney the other day, and he said, the one thing that the UK really has to export right now is London is a hub of financial services. What is going to be the impact of a no-deal Brexit on London? Because London is a very wealthy city. Is just being there a few weeks ago, I can tell you that the displays of wealth in London they're very ostentatious, and they're everywhere that you look. And there are streets full of shops that I wouldn't even go into to window shop, just because they're out of my league, and they're out of the league of most people. But in London, those type of shops really proliferate. So what's going to happen with Brexit, and how does this affect the world order? I mean, the UK remains an important military power, but it's also causing ripples in the relationship between the various countries in the United Kingdom. Ireland is becoming a particular problem. And so the question is, the New York Times had a really good chart the other day, is what happens if all of these things, what happens if it's a no-deal Brexit? Is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? Can the United Kingdom survive? Are they going to have major economic problems? What's going to happen? And nobody knows the answer. At the same time this is going on across the English Channel, France continues to have these yellow vest protests. Now this week, this is the 5th week in a row that they've had these. What people have done is they're not congregating as much in Paris, so that makes the Paris protest a little bit smaller, but they're protesting in smaller groups in more places. Now, the media spin will be, it's not that bad this week, so everybody's going home and they're forgetting about it. At the same time, the yellow vest protest is spreading. In Brussels this morning, I saw pictures and videos of yellow vest protesters. They're protesting like this. There was a big yellow vest protest in London this week. It's pretty serious in France. It's causing a lot of concern as to whether Emmanuel Macron can survive. He went out and he did a speech this week. The Babylon Bee had a very good take on his speech, sort of joking about, Babylon Bee is satire, and it said, we need to calm down. It's nothing to lose our heads over, because there were hundreds of thousands of people beheaded in the French Revolution back in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And that continued for almost 100 years. I mean, I think there were at least 300,000 people beheaded in civilized France. So he gave the speech. He said, okay, we'll back off on the tax. And the people have said, that's not good enough. We want more. And so the question is whether Macron will survive, whether his government will survive, and who will take over if he's pushed out. At the same time that this happened, because of the pretty much unrestricted migration that France has allowed and the religious orientation, there was a attack in Strasbourg this week. 4 people were killed. I believe the attacker was found after a few days and killed by the police. He was shouting Allahu Akbar while he did this, which prompted the French press to say he was psychiatrically unbalanced. And because they ignore it and they never really deal with the problem. Also near Strasbourg this week, this is a Jewish cemetery. And this is the graffiti that was painted in the Jewish cemetery this week. So the New World Order thing comes from the new Foreign Affairs magazine. Now listen, I know that the Foreign Affairs magazine is published by the Council on Foreign Relations. I know that the Council on Foreign Relations is a globalist-oriented group that they would like to establish some form of a world government. Now, there are different views within people that belong to the Council on Foreign Relations as to what that would look like. Some want a simple one world government. Others want more along the lines of a world order. So how that plays out exactly is anybody's guess. But Richard Haass is the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he has written a book called A World in Disarray: American Foreign Policy and the Crisis of the Old Order. And so in the new magazine, title is Who Will Run the World? America, China, and Global Order. And I think if you can get it, it's usually behind a paywall, but I have a subscription, so I'll read part of what he said. He goes through the development of the world order, and he says, look, after the Napoleonic Wars around 1814, 1815, the leading powers got together and came up with a sort of a precursor to the European Union. They engaged in treaties, England, Prussia, Russia, and everything so they didn't want this to happen again. And I think he makes a good point that in 1815, they established a bit of a global world order. Now, it didn't last. It went, of course, we know 100 years later, they were in the middle of World War I. And there was an order that emerged out of World War I, and then that led to World War II, and there was an order that emerged out of World War II. And now Richard Haass, and again, whether you agree with him or not, is an astute observer as to what's going on. And he says, whatever world order we have right now is not doing well. He says this, a stable world order is a rare thing. When one does arise, it tends, and I want you to look at this in light of Bible prophecy, which talks about a global order of some type. Now look, there are disagreements as to whether this Antichrist rules the whole world or just part of it. One thing is certain, he will have opposition. There will be people who oppose him. He will attack other people to take them over. And so there will be an establishment of some sort of global order as the kind of final empire that exists before the return of Christ. So Haass says this. So listen to what he says in light of what we know is going to happen. A stable world order is a rare thing. When one does arise, it tends to come after a great convulsion that creates both the conditions and the desire for something new. It requires a stable distribution of power and broad acceptance of the rules that govern the conduct of the international relations. It also needs skillful statecraft, since an order is made, not born. And no matter how ripe the starting conditions or strong the initial desire, maintaining it demands creative diplomacy, functioning institutions, and effective action to adjust it when circumstances change and buttress it when challenges come. Eventually, inevitably, even the best managed order comes to an end. The balance of power underpinning it becomes imbalanced. The institutions supporting it fail to adapt to new conditions. Some countries fail and others rise, the result of changing capacities, faltering wills, and growing ambitions. Those responsible for upholding the order make mistakes, both in what they choose to do and in what they choose not to do. But if the end of every order is inevitable, the timing and the manner of its ending are not, nor is what comes in its wake. Others tend to expire in a prolonged deterioration rather than a sudden collapse. And just as maintaining the order depends on effective statecraft and effective action, good policy and proactive diplomacy can help determine how that deterioration unfolds and what it brings. Yet for that to happen, something else must come first. Recognition that the old order is never coming back and that efforts to resurrect it will be in vain. As with any ending, acceptance must come before one can move on. And it's interesting, the timing of this as it comes, and we know that one of the big people who brought the new world order language in front of the public was Bush 41, President Bush, the 41st president. He goes on to say this, the major alternatives to a modernized world order supported by the United States, and he knows the United States has really been in control of the world order for the past 70 years, effectively, since the end of World War II. Now, not always great, but United States has been sort of the dominant empire, the dominant power in the world during that period of time. The major alternatives to a modernized world order supported by the United States appear unlikely, unappealing, or both. A Chinese-led order, for example, would be an illiberal one, characterized by authoritarian domestic political systems and statist economies that place a premium on maintaining domestic stability. There would be a return to spheres of influence, with China attempting to dominate its region, likely resulting in clashes with other regional powers such as India, Japan, and Vietnam, which would probably build up their conventional or even nuclear forces. A new democratic rules-based order fashioned and led by medium powers in Europe and Asia, as well as Canada, however attractive a concept, would simply lack the military capacity and domestic political will to get very far. And so what does this new world order look like? And again, he's a globalist, but this is what he's devoted his life to. He says this: a more likely alternative is a world with little order, a world of deeper disarray. Protectionism, nationalism, and populism would gain, and democracy would lose. Conflict within and across borders would become more common, and rivalry between great powers would increase. Cooperation on global challenges would be all but precluded. If this picture sounds familiar, that is because it is increasingly corresponds to the world of today. The deterioration of a world order can set in motion trends that spell catastrophe. And by the way, I'm the guy who's this is a guy, head of the Council on Foreign Relations. World War I broke out some 60 years after the concert of Europe had, for all intents and purposes, broken down in Crimea. It's interesting right now, one of the hot spots in the world is Crimea again. I don't think that's by accident, by the way. There's a lot of reasons for that, and we don't have time to go into them today. What we are seeing today resembles the mid-19th century in important ways. The post-World War II, post-Cold War order cannot be restored, but the world is not yet on the edge of a systemic crisis. I'm not sure I agree with that. Now is the time to make sure one never materializes, be it from breakdown in US-Chinese relations, a clash with Russia, a conflagration in the Middle East, or the cumulative effects of climate change. And by the way, everywhere I look right now in the mainstream media, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, all these, everybody is pushing climate change right now. And my position on climate change is, I don't really doubt maybe the climate is changing. But maybe it's beyond our control. I saw a report this week that scientists want to study about dimming the sun to see if they can control global warming that way. And what would be the results of dimming the sun? And I'm thinking, like, come to Ohio, November to March, you have a laboratory to study what happens when the sun doesn't shine, right? It's been, I mentioned to somebody the other day, it's like, we were just in England in the last part of November, and ever since we got home, it hasn't been gray, it's been between gray and gray-black. And I mentioned, I think I said to Pam, to be back in the sunny skies of England. So, and look, if I'm playing golf without a coat in January, I don't really care. And the world can adapt to this. Climate change happens. You can drive north of here 2 hours, and you can see where glaciers a mile thick used to be. A mile thick ice before the Industrial Revolution, before cars existed. Climate change, and people are still around, right? I guess people adapted to that. So he goes on. The good news is that it is far from inevitable that the world will eventually arrive at a catastrophe. The bad news is that it is far from certain that it will not. Very interesting article, and there's a whole series of articles in that magazine that also talk about the development of China and what's going on with China and how China seems to be coming to the forefront. But is that a good thing? And it talks, there's 3 or 4 articles in the new Foreign Affairs, the January-February 2019 issue that talks about this. So how this is going to play out, look, we know ultimately this is what's going to happen. In the Middle East, this is an interesting development to keep an eye on. Tehran, this is from the Tehran Times. Tehran hosting Caspian states meeting on maritime safety and security. The fourth meeting of the collaboration on maritime safety and security in Caspian Sea kicked off in Tehran on Monday, participated in by representatives from the 5 littoral states. The two-day event is hosting representatives from, and these are cities, they're nations that border on the Caspian Sea, which is a very, very one of the premier oil-rich regions of the world. Iran, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Russia, and Turkmenistan. Now, all of these, I believe, have a role in end times Bible prophecy. And so here we see them, we see this sort of emerging order that lines up with Ezekiel 38 and 39 alignment of nations coming together over Syria. Now, it's not a for sure alliance. It's not set in stone, but I'm not sure that it's a tight alliance when Ezekiel 38 and 39 happens. But you can see it forming, and you can see Turkey, you see Iran, you see Russia, and you also see Russia making forays to build up relations with Sudan and Libya and Turkey as well. Now, Turkey and Russia don't get along all that well. Turkey and Iran don't get along all that well. But there's something that happens in Ezekiel 38 and 39 that unites them. And so here we see other aspects of it, the Stan republics of Central Asia, which are Muslim, kind of coming in through another part of that emerging order. So it's something to keep an eye on as to see how it develops. At the same time this is happening, there still remains this push for peace in the Middle East. Well, this is, before I get to that, here's another one. Turkey, you see down here, this is from the Wall Street Journal the other day. Turkey to fight U.S.-backed Kurdish rebels. And above that, Pompeo presses UN on Iran's ballistic missile program. Iran is building up its ballistic missiles. That's not good news. They're increasing the range of those missiles. They are trying to import that guidance technology that they're developing and they're building into Syria. Israel doesn't like that. Israel's not going to allow that to occur. But now they have the problem in Syria that one report that I read this week, I haven't been able to verify it, so please don't take this as the gospel truth. But one report was that Russia has told Israel, look, we're going to have Russian officers, military personnel, manning the S-300 missile defense, air defense systems that we've installed in Syria. And the message was that is, look, you attack those installations, you're going to be killing Russians, and we will respond to that. So the one question that always comes up is, what's the trigger for Ezekiel 38 and 39? And the answer is, I don't know. It could be something fairly innocuous. World War I got started when a crown prince from the Austro-Hungarian Empire was assassinated in Sarajevo. It could be something like that. We don't know exactly what it will be. It's just that, but we see the alliances forming as soft as they are. But there is a push for peace in the Middle East, the sort of ongoing saga as to when is Trump's peace plan going to come out? Is it ever going to come out? Here's Jared Kushner interviewed on Hannity. Look, everybody keeps saying it's next week, it's next month, it's early next year, it'll be in 6 months. And we've been hearing this for what, 2 years now? It's sort of like, remember the old Saturday Night Live bit, Franco is still dead? General Franco of Spain, remember he lingered in the hospital for a long time, and then after he passed away, Saturday Night Live made a joke about it that, yeah, last we checked, he's still in the news, he's still dead. So here's Jared Kushner talking on Hannity the other night about the Middle East peace plan. He was asked, by the way, a question about Saudi Arabia, Khashoggi, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who now in some places is being referred to as Mohammed Bonesaw Man. Figure out what happened to Khashoggi, and that'll, and I guess I can never go to Saudi Arabia now, but although Bill Kristol, the columnist for the New York Times, Kristol, he actually went to Saudi Arabia, and he's been very, very critical of the prince. And he said in his column today in the New York Times, people don't really want to talk to me, and I'm surprised they even let me come. So here's Jared Kushner on Hannity.
Last question. Another area I know that you've been interested in is the Middle East. You've been on a number of trips. You've been to Jordan, Egypt, Israel, Saudi Arabia. You have talked to all these people. It seems like there's a moment where there is a new alliance or coalition emerging against Iranian hegemony and a potentially nuclear-armed Iran. Has that process been hurt as a result of the Khashoggi killing? What is the status? I know 17 individuals are being held responsible. And do you feel that we will get to the bottom of it if we haven't already?
I think our intelligence agencies are making their assessments, and we're hoping to make sure that there's justice brought where that should be. We're focused now on the broader region, which is figuring out how to hopefully bring a deal together between the Israelis and the Palestinians. That conflict has gone on for way too long. The president's been very focused on trying to bring all the different parties together, and we're hopeful in the next couple of months we'll put out our plan, which, again, not every side is going to love, but there's enough in it and enough reasons why people should take it and move forward. And this plan will keep the Israeli people safe, give them a good future, but also give a real opportunity and hope for the Palestinian people so that they can live much better lives. I've been saying a lot that you shouldn't be hijacking your children's future because of your grandparents' conflict. And this is a conflict that's been going on for way too long, and the way that people are living in Gaza and in the West Bank right now is not acceptable, and there's a lot we can be doing to improve their quality of life, but it comes with resolving some of these core issues. And it's not just the Israelis that want it, it's not just the Palestinian people who want it, it's all the people I speak to throughout the entire Middle East who'd like to see this issue resolved so that they can start focusing on a brighter future.
And on Friday in the Jerusalem Post, there was a good article, can't remember the author, 3 takeaways from the Kushner-Hannity interview on the Middle East, and here's what they said. First takeaway is, we may never see this thing. Second takeaway is, be like Jared Kushner if you're pushing this and never mention Palestinian statehood. And 3 is linkage. He links it to the resolution of all these other crises in the Middle East. Even the president's one of the president's point persons on this particular issue, is saying that we want to have this type of peace because it will lead to the resolution of these other conflicts. So even Jared Kushner is making the linkage. Now, it's interesting that at the time that all of this is occurring, I mentioned earlier we have the cultural, geopolitical things, a disruption in the global order that's recognized by almost everyone. All this is occurring at the same time. I read the verses in Daniel, in 2 Thessalonians 2, Daniel 8, Daniel 11, to show you that there's an underlying spirit, as a spiritual battle that's going on behind all of this. This new world order, whatever it is, exactly how it's put together, emerges out of a spirit that will be embodied in this Antichrist figure. And the spirit behind it is an opposition to the things of God. So, for example, in Germany, you see these brochures about, the racists, the right-wing extremists that believe in what? Man-woman marriage, male-female gender. Those people are extremists. Those people are bad. All of these things are occurring, and I point them out each week, is not to necessarily denigrate those people, but to show you whose grip who they're working for. And it's a spiritual battle. It's spiritual warfare. And this is one of the ways that it manifests itself. So if this Antichrist figure is going to come on the scene and he's going to be in direct opposition to God, and people are going to worship him, then we're going to see this rise of an Antichrist spirit. Paul noted, even in his day, the mystery of iniquity is already operational. But it's going to be like all these other Bible prophecy things that we talk about. There will be indicators that it's happening, but then as you get closer to the point where everything converges, there's this exponential increase. It's like knowledge. I used to do seminars on the information technology and what people had to do to preserve their information and produce it in discovery. And there's been this exponential growth in information. You know this to be fact. Your cell phone, everybody carries around gigabytes of information in their pocket now. And by the way, it's a growth in information. It's not. It seems that as the just an observation on my part, as wisdom or as knowledge increases and information increases exponentially, wisdom seems to be going the opposite direction. So there's a correlation there. So I guess you there's a balance that you have to have, and as information goes up, wisdom goes down. There were some attacks this week in Israel, terror attacks, stabbing at one of the checkpoints, a shooting at another checkpoint. Here's a picture in the Haaretz of a funeral of a little baby who was born 10 weeks early because his mother had been shot. She seems to be recovering okay, but they had the funeral for this child. You can find some of the video of it on the funeral took place on the mount at the cemetery on the Mount of Olives. Very moving. The mother and father were recovering from their injuries, and they were not able to go. But this happened. It was all over Israel. There were these terror attacks this week. It was interesting the way the Arab press responded to that. In Arab news, it says Israel puts Ramallah on lockdown as what? 5 die in new violence. Do you see the equivalency that they make? The terrorists are the same as the people that they kill. So they don't really call them terrorists. 5 people died. Well, some of the terrorists were killed, including one that had committed a attack on an industrial park about 2 months ago. In the Al Jazeera, West Bank shootings kill 3 Palestinians, 2 Israelis. And look at the subheadline. Israeli forces kill 3 Palestinian suspects. They won't call them terrorists. Another thing that's happening, this is a report from the University of Maryland about American views of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What they are finding is that there is an increasing push for a one-state solution among people in the United States across all demographics, ages, and even religious beliefs. And in this survey, for example, here's one. In general, what role would you want the Trump administration to play in mediating the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Should the Trump administration lean toward Israel, lean towards the Palestinians, lean towards neither side? Among Republicans, 57% said lean towards Israel. 3% said lean towards Palestinians. What do you see on the Democratic side? 7% of Democrats surveyed said, and there's a margin of error, 2% on this poll, 7% said lean towards Israel, and 90% said lean towards the Palestinians, that's 8%, or 82% said lean towards neither side. If you broke it down by age, you see that 35 and over more lean towards Israel. Younger people were about half as likely to say lean towards Israel. Another question in the survey was, the United States has been acting as a mediator between them with the aim of reaching an agreement in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Whether or not these efforts succeed, there is a question about what kind of future for Israel and the Palestinians the U.S. should be supporting over the long term, and many analysts feel that time is running out for some options. Here are 4 possible approaches that are frequently discussed. And look how they responded. A two-state solution, Israel and Palestinian states side by side. The Palestinian state would be established on the territories that Israel has occupied since 1967. 24% of Republicans support that, 48% Democratic. A one-state solution, number two, a single democratic state in which both Jews and Arabs are full and equal citizens, covering all of what is now Israel and the Palestinian territories, and Republicans and Democrats were pretty close on that one. Then there was an annexation without equal citizenship. That was not supported by very many. And then four, maintain the occupation of both the territories Israel's captured in 67, the Palestinians inhabiting them indefinitely, and that didn't have a lot of support from anyone. The other one, I think this is probably even a little bit more telling. Which of the following statements is closer to your view if a two-state solution is not an option? One, I favor the Jewishness of Israel more than its democracy. I support the continuation of Israel's Jewish majority in government, even if it means Palestinians will not have citizenship and full rights. Now, we can argue about the way that question is constructed, but 42% of Republicans supported that, only 12% of Democrats. Number two, I favor Israel's democracy more than its Jewishness. I support a single democratic state in which Arabs and Jews are equal, even if that means Israel would no longer be a politically Jewish state. And again, nobody thinks this through, because if you think that through, there won't be Jews. The Palestinians have said from the beginning they want to push them into the sea. I was watching, by the way, on HBO, there's an interesting documentary right now called Oslo, and they talk about the Oslo Diary, what happened with the Oslo Accords, and it's very interesting. It shows that these negotiations took place in virtual secrecy. Very few people in Israel or in the Palestinian territories knew that they were even going on, which kind of leads you to believe that, well, maybe whatever this covenant is it going to be something widely public? And I'm not convinced that it would be, because Oslo was pretty quiet for a long, long time. But they talk about it, and one of the Palestinian negotiators says, you're one of the most powerful militaries in the world, Israel. You're a military lawyer. The Israeli representative was a former military guy and a military lawyer. You're a powerful military. Why do you fear us? And the guy gave a really good answer. He said, because it's not just you. It's all the people who will come after you. We could crush you in a day. He didn't say that, but the implication of the way he acted was, we could take care of you with no problem, but there are a lot of other people that want to destroy us and push us into the ocean. Bret Stephens has a good article in the New York Times this week, in editorial. And listen, Stephens has had, he's a never-Trumper. He works for the New York Times. At times, I think he's lost a good chunk of his mind. But he's Jewish, and he came out, and this was a response to Michelle Goldberg's article. So Michelle Goldberg is a leftist. She claims to be a centrist, but she's, in my view, radical left. She's anti-Israel. She'll deny all this, but I'm just telling you, I've read her stuff. And so you have sort of this, she wrote an editorial a week ago about, anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitic. And Bret Stephens this week in the New York Times wrote an op-ed that said, yeah, it is. Especially when anti-Semitism is tunneling under your border to try to attack you. So Bret Stephens is wrong some of the time. Michelle Goldberg is a leftist, and you apply the general rule to her. Leftism is what? Always wrong, okay? And one of the disputes, one of the things that Bret Stephens cites was Nasrallah's speech back about 1981 that a lot of people dispute. And people have cited this and said, look, he's anti-Semitic, he wants to destroy Israel. And of course, all the people in the media came along and said, oh, that's not what Nasrallah never said that. Well, somebody dug and they found, and here's a transcript, and you can actually listen to the audio online. This is what Nasrallah said back in 1991, but I'll tell you, among the signs and signals which guide us in the Islamic prophecies, and not only in the Jewish prophecies, is that this state of Israel will be established, and that the Jews will gather from all parts of the world into occupied Palestine, not in order to bring about the Antichrist and the end of the world, but rather that Allah, the glorified and Most High, wants to save you from having to go to the ends of the world. For they have gathered in one place, and there the final and decisive battle will take place. So in other words, yeah, he's glad that they're all coming back to Israel because it'll save him the trouble of going to the ends of the earth to find all the Jews to kill. Now, people can deny it, and somebody like Michelle Goldberg, I'm pretty sure, will deny it. This thing with Israel's been going on a long time. I just went back 1 year ago tomorrow, December 17th, I did a prophecy update. And I talked about this was when the U.S. had moved their embassy to Jerusalem, or announced that. The UN came in and condemned it. And I went back, these are some of the charts that I used in that update. The UN General Assembly, 97 resolutions criticizing countries. 83 criticizing Israel, 14 all the other nations of the world. The UN General Assembly in 2016 had 26 resolutions. 20 against Israel, 6 against the rest of the world. We just saw these resolutions. It's like the annual agenda item. UNESCO resolutions, percentage of resolutions against Israel, 100%. The UN Human Rights Organization, resolutions against Israel, 67 against all the nations of the world, 68 against Israel. And this is significant because this week, December 11th, 1917 was a very important day. Here's an article from either December 13th or December 12th, New York Times, British push for Jerusalem. And there you see the video of General Allenby, the head of the British Army, marching into Jerusalem, having captured the Battle of Jerusalem. This came only about a month, a little over a month, 5 weeks after the Balfour Declaration, issued by Lord Balfour, saying that we support the British government, His Majesty supports the establishment of a Jewish state in Israel. It's interesting that it says this. The headline says this: British push on what? Jerusalem. And this is the telegram that this is laid out in the New York Times article. I entered the city officially at noon today with a few of my staff. The procession was all afoot, and at the Jaffa Gate I was received by the guards representing England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, Australia, New Zealand, India, France, and Italy. They received me well. Guards have been placed over the holy places. My military governor is in contact with the acting custodians and the Latin and Greek representatives. The governor has detailed an officer to supervise the holy places. The Mosque of Omar and the area around it have been placed under Muslim control, and a military cordon of Mohammedan officers and soldiers has been established around the mosque. Orders have been established that no non-Muslim is to pass within the cordon without permission of the military governor and of the Muslim in charge. And it goes on, it talks a little bit, and it goes on to relay things about the battle. It's interesting, though, that this all comes up, we know, at the end of November. This is when the UN pushes for anti-Israel resolutions to mark when they adopted a resolution, Resolution 181, on November 29th, 1947, just a little over 70 years ago. The city of Jerusalem shall be established there'll be a Jewish state, there'll be a Palestinian state, and then Israel, Jerusalem, was to be a corpus seteratum. It was supposed to be a separate entity. And that's why when the U.S. came out and moved its embassy a year ago and said, we're moving our embassy to Israel, to Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, that's why everybody went into meltdown mode. That's why the whole UN pretty much got up and spoke against the UN resolution that what the Trump administration had done. Just yesterday, on Shabbat, Australia Prime Minister Scott Morrison came up and said, we're going to move our embassy to Jerusalem. But I want you to listen to exactly what he says. Rather than take my words for it, here's what he said.
Australia now recognises West Jerusalem being the seat of the Knesset and many of the institutions of government is the capital of Israel. West Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. And we look forward to moving our embassy to West Jerusalem when practical, in support of and after final status determination. We've decided to start the work, though, now to identify a suitable site for an Australian embassy in West Jerusalem.
So what did he do? He came out and he said, we'll move our embassy to West Jerusalem. Now listen, I'm tired of wimpy politicians. It's Jerusalem. And he wimped out. And you notice he said, well, we'll move it after everything's settled. And he had promised that his campaign promise was not what he ended up saying. And even I think this is the Sunday Telegraph from Sydney, says his shifts position on embassy move after furor. He got a lot of pressure. So what did he do? He weaseled out. He wimped out. I'm going to play a little bit of an interview just because of time constraints. I have two things. I'm going to play just a short interview to give you an update on Brian Schrager and the Heim report. By the way, these are photographs that he took recently in Israel. I think they're phenomenal photographs. We'll just talk a little bit about the Heim report. He went to a meeting with foreign journalists and Prime Minister Netanyahu this week. But enjoy the photographs and just a little bit of the interview. I'll have to play the rest of it at a future time. So I'm here with Brian Schrager of Jerusalem Journal and the Heim report, that's CHAIM. And it's been a while since we've talked, Brian, at least on the, for public consumption, if you will. So a couple people have kind of asked me what's going on with the Heim report. I know the updates haven't been as usual lately, and explain what's going on in that process.
Well, about 6 months ago, I began the process. I realized that the current website, JerusalemJournal.net, was not appropriate for the Haim report. It was too difficult to try to find stories, and there wasn't a correlation between the Haim report and the Jerusalem Journal. So I began building a new website, thinking it would only take a few weeks, maybe a month or two, and it's been 6 months. And what has happened is, instead of using a prefab approach to building a website where you have components that you kind of plug in order to make this thing work, we've had to basically build it from scratch. And that means coding, that means all this kind of detailed technical stuff. And it's coming out, it's working, but it's just a much, much more prolonged and expensive process than was imagined. I think it's really, really important that it get done, because having a good website that is consistent in what the Haim report is doing, you can go in, you can find things. This is a foundation, and in order to build and get these stories out to the English-speaking world, around the world, we need that foundation of a good, reliable, easy-to-use, and clear website. And we're getting there. It's just frustratingly slow. I keep thinking we're on the verge of having it, and we are, but it's now probably still a matter of a few weeks before it's actually ready.
Okay. And by the way, you're not the person that I had trouble identifying on The Economist, the world in 2019 cover last week, are you?
You know why? Because this is my hat. That guy had what?
Yeah, you're much more. Your hat is much hipper than that.
Yeah, more English.
Yeah. So some people said that was it. So tell people. I'm sure you need support to help you with the expenses and that type of thing. And tell people how they could give.
Oh yes, thank you. The Haim report is actually the primary publication of the Jerusalem Journal. And the Jerusalem Journal is a 501c3 U.S. nonprofit, and so donations are how we survive. And we need the money to actually do the work God's given us to do here, which is to bring news, current events to the English-speaking world, especially to evangelicals and other Christians who stand with the Jewish state, so that they are equipped to know what's going on and can plug those things into a biblical framework like you do every week in your Prophecy News Update. So this is very, very essential work. So in any case, yes, please, as God is leading, partner with us. It is a partnership, and anyone can do this. Individuals, institutions, churches, and you can do it easily by going to JerusalemJournal.net and clicking on the donate section there. So it's JerusalemJournal.net/donate, and yeah, you can go on and you can give by credit card through PayPal, and if you prefer, you can also contact us and we'll send you an address where a check can be sent.
Okay, well, good. So all that contact information is at your... By the way, so just so you know, these pictures, that's a sunset in the Judean hills near where he lives. This is Jaffa Street in the upper left-hand corner. Obviously, I think you can figure out which is the sunset picture, right? I don't need it. Okay, the upper left-hand corner is the light rail line on Jaffa Street in Jerusalem. And then the other picture was taken on one of the first evenings of Hanukkah along Ben Yehuda Street. I just think it's a phenomenal photograph with the colors and the kind of the glistening of the wet streets and everything. So he goes on to talk about the fact that he went to this thing with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and Prime Minister Netanyahu was there. He was ready to speak, and it was at a children's center. It's really a thing for handicapped children. And they sort of said, okay, the Prime Minister is here, but we'll get to you in a minute. We have some important things to do, Prime Minister Netanyahu. And I just thought I'd play just a minute or so of sort of what happened at that meeting. Here is here. Okay, I'll just jump in here and you can listen to it.
And it works to improve the lives of children and people of all ages, actually, with mental handicaps for the most part.
These are some of the students.
was just a remarkable evening. When Netanyahu...
And then, so I thought, I would show you why Prime Minister Netanyahu had to wait. I thought it was a little more uplifting than some of the things I talk about. Prime Minister Netanyahu, I'll close with this, was asked a question about by Fox News about what's going on with the security situation in the north. Well, you'll hear the question and the answer at the little press conference that he had at the end of his talk.
It's clear what the Israeli policy is for attacking Iranian proxies in places like Lebanon, Syria, and Gaza. My question for you today, Mr. Prime Minister, what is the Israeli red line for engaging Iran militarily within its own borders?
Within our borders or their borders?
Within Iran's own borders.
Well, let me put it this way. Less than a year ago, we went in and took the crown jewels from the Tower of London in Tehran. You know what that is? Iran had a secret atomic archive in which they stashed the material that they amassed in a secret nuclear program. And instead of destroying this material when they said that they stopped, they stashed it so that when the time is ripe, they could come back and reveal. That's where it was, it was in a warehouse, an innocent-looking warehouse, and we found 55,000 pages in these files and 50,000 additional CDs. We found there everything. I mean, what we found is a plan to their goal, which they said quite openly, was to produce 5 atomic warheads. There it is. This is a page from the file. Design, produce, and test 5 warheads, each with 10 kiloton TNT yield, for an integration on a missile. The missile, of course, wasn't covered in the agreement either. I mean, they cheated by not coming clean on this to the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. That was a premise of carrying out the Iran deal. They didn't tell this. And then, of course, the ballistic missiles weren't covered in the deal, and they were ready to do this. So we went into Tehran and took it out. Did you see Argo, the movie? Yeah, this is Argo to the nth degree, okay? But we got this stuff out. And so, our red line is our survival. The answer to your question is our red line is our survival. We do what is necessary to protect the state of Israel against the Iranian regime that openly calls for the annihilation of the Jewish state.
So you are not ruling out engaging Iran within its own borders?
Well, I'm not ruling out doing anything that we need to do to defend ourselves. For the moment, Israel is the only, Israel's military is the only military in the world that is directly engaging Iranian forces. We're doing that in Syria and pulling them back, because what they want to do is bring their army right here, 1,500 kilometers from Iran to our border, bring in missiles from 400 to 700 kilometers, which covers all of Israel, bring in 80,000 Shiite militias with the express purpose of destroying us. And my policy has been, we're going to stop you. We're going to stop things, bad things, when they're small. So we meet Iran head on in Syria, and if we need to, we'll do whatever else we need to do to protect ourselves, as you would too.
Jordana Miller from...
Well, and by the way, I fully support Prime Minister Netanyahu and his use of PowerPoint. I think it's wonderful. I read an article this morning that the tech sector is growing so fast in Israel that they currently have about 15,000 openings in the tech sector that are going unfulfilled. So I'll just offer my services. I will do Prime Minister Netanyahu's PowerPoint so that his PowerPoint person can go work in the tech sector and build the Israeli economy. All I ask for is, a place in Jerusalem and access to the Prime Minister on a regular basis, and that's all. I'm very modest in my request. That's not a demand; it's a request. So, in case that it gets to the Prime Minister, I'm just kidding, obviously. But look, this is part of the Israeli strategy, though, is that their strategy. This is from Israel Today. I'll close with this: that they've known about these tunnels that they destroy. They're starting to destroy. They've known about them for a long time. The question is, why are they doing it now? And I think it's a very good analysis Israel's new strategy in the war against Iran. And here's what the article says. By waiting with the destruction of the tunnels, Israel has achieved two things. First, Iran and Hezbollah spent huge amounts of money on the tunnel project, money that otherwise would have been used to produce or purchase weapons which could be used against Israel. And what Prime Minister Netanyahu said in other comments was, we waited until they were just about ready to start to use them. I mean, some of these were, they could drive vehicles through them, transport troops in. They wanted to do it to take over the Galilee. And this is not different than what Hezbollah has done in the past. Historically, there was an attack in the Galilee many years ago on a school. They took over a school, and I can't remember if it was 105 hostages, mostly children, and I think over 100 were killed, mostly little children, by Hezbollah. This is the kind of people they're dealing with. And Prime Minister Netanyahu says, look, we know history, we know what we're doing, and we'll do what we need to do to protect the state of Israel. And it's good that he's doing it because there are precious few other people in the world that really care about it at all. In fact, they would like to see it go away. So first was they spent a lot of money on it, and then second, by destroying the tunnels at the moment Hezbollah was about to finish them, the IDF scored a decisive victory in the psychological war with Hezbollah and Iran. The first time that Israel did something for a psychological victory was what he talked about at the beginning part of the comments that I played for you. We went into Tehran. It's interesting to use the Tower of London because we were just there at the Tower of London. That's where they store the crown jewels of the British monarchy. And he said, we essentially went into the Tower of London in London and took the crown jewels. That's the equivalent of what we did. And they got all the information out. It's amazing. It's one of these Israeli operations that are just sort of like the raid on Entebbe that took place on July 4th, 1976. Amazing thing. So great times to be alive. Don't lose hope. A lot of pieces. It's all moving together. The puzzle's starting to come together. Let's pray. Father, thanks so much for your word. We pray that you will be with us this week. Give us the opportunities to share the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ with those around us. That is the only hope for the world. The hope that the fact that Jesus died on the cross for our sins, and we can accept the gift of salvation by faith and belief in him, and that Jesus is returning as the reigning king in Jerusalem. In Jesus' name, amen.